I traded seats with a guy on a 7-hour flight so I could sit next to my girlfriend. He ended up sitting next to the two most annoying children on the whole plane. What crappy situations have you unintentionally plunged someone else into? My freshman year of college, my best friend and I requested to live together. Well, housing messed up and put us in 2 separate rooms with 2 other roommates. We talked to one of the guys and he agreed to switch rooms with me. What I could not have known was my original roommate was a 300-pound tuba player who didn't shower. I felt bad for the guy who switched with me, but there was nothing I could do about it. I like how tuba player makes it sound even worse. I went to a Chinese restaurant on Haight Street a few years ago. My friends and I had eyes bigger than our stomachs. We left the place with a huge bag of leftovers. On the way home we saw a lady in a wheelchair begging for change near the freeway on-ramp. We decided quickly that she needed the food more than us. We gave her the entire bag of food. She seemed genuinely thankful for the food and thanked us profusely. That night we all got explosive diarrhea. As much as that sucked, all I could imagine was some poor old lady in a wheelchair scrambling to find a bathroom. My grandfather was set to be deployed in San Francisco during World War II. A buddy of his had a deployment in France. His friend had a fiancée and family in San Francisco and begged my grandfather to trade deployments with him. My grandfather didn't have much going on in his life and didn't really care where he got sent, so he agreed. He wound up in France, where all the action was essentially long over, and the troops just relaxed and enjoyed an extended vacation near Paris. He later found out that San Francisco was simply a staging point where they sent troops to prepare for the front lines and heavy-duty combat. Whoops. Ask my friend to drive me to a place a whiles away since I had no car. A 15-minute trip on the expressway ended up lasting 3 hours in traffic and he got slightly rear-ended by 2 different people. Similar situation. Had a friend pick me up from the airport. Turns out he was the one person I knew who didn't know where the airport was and was lost for 2 hours. I was working at a gas station and asked one of my co-workers to cover 2 shifts for me while I went on a short vacation. On the second day, he got robbed at knife point. Got a cut on his face and another on his arm. They weren't bad, but they needed stitches. He quit soon after, as he was too scared to return to work. Oh yes, I felt very bad about it. He wasn't even supposed to be there that day. The same thing happened to me, but the reverse. I was traveling by plane from Champaign, Cologne, Germany to JFK Airport after spring break. Coincidentally, there also was a large group of mentally challenged kids traveling on the same flight. Now don't get me wrong, I have nothing against the mentally challenged, but this literally was the worst flight I have ever experienced. The first seat I had was next to a friend of mine who was happy to sit next to someone she knew, considering how large the plane was, but I also knew at the time that she had a thing for a friend of mine. So when he offered to switch with me to sit next to her, I obliged. Worst mistake ever. I had to sit next to 2 mentally challenged kids for the entire 9-hour flight, and both of them crapped themselves in the beginning and middle of the flight. They never went to the restroom once. The smell that lingered in the air around me was so horrid. My eyes were tearing the entire flight. The one to my left, who was about 18 or 19, stared at me the entire flight and kept screaming at me in random gibberish. Again, I have nothing against them, but I still had a god-awful time and I couldn't even sleep because of the screaming. TLDR. Tried to be a bro, ended up smelling crap for 9 hours while getting screamed at by 2 mentally challenged kids. Your friend owes you, big time, like volunteering to be your first sexual experience if you come out of the closet big, giving you a kidney, that sort of thing. It was about 10 years ago. My family allowed me to bring 2 friends with me to Tennessee to go skiing, and one day we went to this place where you could rent inner tubes and slide down the side of some mountain slope. So we get to the point where you're handed a tube. I got this super crappy tube and I just so luckily placed my hand over where it was torn so I could feel the air rushing out. I quickly traded it for another and this girl behind me got the broken tube. Anyway, I go down the slope and get to the bottom and I look up to see the girl with the broken tube just stuck in the middle of the slope as some 200-pound man just slams into her, knocking her about 15 feet in the air, leading to her ultimately just rolling down the slope without a tube. crying hysterically. Why in the frick would they keep handing out that broken tube? I mean, that's some serious negligence there. This one's not about me, but an old family friend who used to be an NYC firefighter. The 11th of September, 2001 was the date of the NYC mayoral primary, and the firefighters union was looking for volunteers to canvass for their endorsed Democratic candidate, Alan Havisi, who, as an aside, eventually went to jail for corruption. My family friend decided that it'd be better to be on a street corner handing out flyers, holding signs, whatever, on a beautiful September Tuesday than in his Chinatown Manhattan firehouse. So he switched shifts with another guy in the house. That guy didn't make it home. The family friend was driving in from his home in Westchester to start his canvassing shift at about 10 AM when he heard the news, and immediately went to the hazmat station in Queens to get his gear. By the time he made it to the site, both towers had fallen. Not so much me doing it, but I had almost the same thing happen a week ago. On my flight from DC to London, I was on one of those planes, I think a 767, but not sure, where there are 2 seats by each wall, 4 in the middle, and 2 aisles. Well, I have the window seat, and this lady comes down the aisle, looking for her seat, and sits next to me. We're in a very quiet, comfortable section of the plane, near the front of the cabin. First thing as she sits down, she waves over a flight attendant to move seats because I can't stand aisle seats. She got moved to a middle seat in the back of the plane next to a crying kid. I had an empty seat and lots of arm room for the 8-hour flight. I didn't see her again, so I don't know how much I immediately regret this decision she had going on, but it worked out for me. I had a similar experience, only I was that guy. I gave a teenage girl my seat so that she could sit next to her friends. On comes 2 large Haitian women with a baby. They didn't smell good, to put it nicely, and I ended up holding the baby for about 10 minutes while they stood waiting for the bathroom. Cute baby though. Also had the opposite happen on a flight to Europe. The flight attendant asked me if I wouldn't mind switching seats, apparently because I was flying alone with a girl who was uncomfortable. She was a little blonde thing and didn't want to sit next to a large talkative fellow. Only it turned out that he was a real nice guy. He ordered us 2 beers right after we took off. They were free, but I normally would only order 1. And we ended up drinking 6 beers each in the first hour, and he let me watch his portable DVD player with him. We both fell asleep for the remainder of the flight. Good time. My story is the exact polar opposite. My girlfriend and I boarded late onto a 1-hour flight, and someone gave up his seat so my girlfriend and I could sit together. He moved back 1 row, between 2 good-looking chicks. I gave him my 3 liquor vouchers as a token of appreciation, and I think one of the girls took him up on it. Win-win. Win. Good-looking chicks can turn any situation on its head. This was really his own fault, but here goes. I had a friend who worked at a furniture store and would get an employee discount of 50%. I was moving and needed a couch, so he offered to buy it using his discount. He asked for my credit card, which I provided, then proceeded to buy the furniture at a discount with my card. His manager asks why it's being run on my card and fires my friend. I did think it was weird that he asked for my card, thinking it would be cleaner if I just paid him back. But since he was the one that asked for it, I figured either the policy was okay with that, or that the name on the CC wouldn't blatantly be right there, and that he would know better. Oops. This happens occasionally when the person in front of me at the checkout says, "Oh, you only have 1 thing. Go ahead," and then of course, the machine malfunctions, or the cashier inputs the wrong code and has to wait until the manager can come and override it. I always get so embarrassed. I was coming back from a trip to Japan with a few friends. I had bought a wooden sword from a little gift shop inside Yasukuni Shrine. At the time I thought it would fit inside my luggage to take home. Turns out it didn't, so I asked a friend if he could put in his suitcase. He said sure. Flash forward to when we make it back to immigration at SFO. Out of the 15 of us, he is the one guy who gets pulled aside for a random security screening. He was gone an extra hour because of that wooden sword, though we did feel worse for the attractive Japanese girl who was also picked for a security screening, as those agents just had a field day with her panties. Same thing happened in the Bridget Jones sequel, but it was a snake bowl full of H and she ended up going to a Thai prison. I heard a story once like that. Basically, two friends got on the tube together and found that there were no seats. One of them were pregnant, so standing would not have been a very good option for her. The other friend asked a man who was sitting if he wouldn't mind giving his seat up for the pregnant woman. The man was more than happy to. Only then did the non-pregnant friend see that the man had no arms, and when the train started moving he couldn't hold on and kept falling over. What a gentleman. Even when he needed a seat as well, he gave it up. I can only hope real life karma shoots back his way. I went through a McDonald's drive-thru and was short 5 cents, and the girl waved me through and said it was okay. I went back through the drive-thru a week later and the same girl was working, so I gave her a nickel to make up for being short the week before. She had a huge smile and thanked me and went to put the nickel in that automatic change dispenser they have. Somehow the front came off of the dispenser and all the change in it fell out. It was full of change. Change fell out of the drive-thru window out into the street. She looked like she was about to cry. I parked my car and got out and helped her pick up what I could. At least you helped her, thumbs up. This very timid looking mother called a flight attendant over to me and her to have her ask me to switch seats with her son, who was 2 rows up. I had the luxurious aisle seat and the son had the very crappy middle seat, but I said I would switch. I move all my stuff only to find a huge guy has taken the aisle seat. It's a full flight and boarding has finished. I squeeze my way into the middle seat and force my armrests down, only to have the huge guy informs me cannot happen due to his size. His fat spills over onto my lap and I am forced to sit next to beached whale guy from Oregon, the DC. Sucked donkey balls. During our flight, a stewardess came over to our aisle and says to the whale that in the future he has to purchase 2 seats. She sees me in my uncomfortable state and tells me she has something to show me. She takes me to the back of the plane to hang out with the other stewardesses for the remainder of the flight. They had an extra fold down seat for me. If you are reading this, thank you Susie the stewardess. TL. DR. Forced to sit next to a future heart attack diabetes patient. Saved by Susie. My Anglican father once told me a funny story about the time he and his brothers went to a Pentecostal church, and while the people were rolling around on the floor speaking in tongues, they noticed the most beautiful girl in their class among them. She was rolling around and crying out and not wearing any underwear, and they all had a good show and a good laugh. Decades later, at a house party, we were all sharing stories and laughing, and I told Dad he should tell his story about the Pentecostal girl rolling around with no underwear on. And Dad turned white as a ghost. She herself wasn't there, but her husband was, as were several other of my father's friends who happened to be Pentecostal. Hopefully that taught you to not give away the punchline to someone else's story. Short sad story. Kid I knew stole shotgun, front passenger seat, from a friend of mine, who had called it, but my friend was a super nice guy and let him have it and sat in the back seat. Car lost control around a corner and my friend got crushed between a tree and the car and died. Sucks hard. Poor kid who stole shotgun looked like a ghost at the memorial service. On first read, I thought your acquaintance had stolen actual firearm and, as such, I was considerably confused. Pro tip: if you get separated on the plane from your significant other kid and the person sitting next to them is hesitant about moving, tell the guy your SO. Child is extremely afraid of flying and gets motion sickness very easily, and then ask the flight attendant for a couple extra bath bags. Works like a charm. Pro tip: buy your own plane to avoid hassles. I am careful about pre-booking seats when flying with my kid, but, for some reason, an airline moved us and put my young child into a middle seat many aisles from me in another middle seat on a full flight. Of course, no one is going to want to change with me, but I was going to have to inconvenience someone, which sucked. Somehow, more than one person offered, which I appreciated so much. The flight attendant came to check on me, and I told her how generous 3 different people had been about helping us sit together. She was glad it worked out and no issues were had, so she gave them all free drinks. Not only was I grateful to them, I was grateful to her for that, because while I thanked the guy who switched with me profusely, sitting middle seat on a long flight is almost always painful and words really don't help much. Yeah, but similarly no one wants to sit next to an unaccompanied small child who is woefully separate from his or her main source of entertainment, aka parent. One holiday season I had procrastinated on purchasing my plane ticket home, and the cost of the ticket went through the roof to the point where it was completely unaffordable. Determined to make it there, I decided that I would simply take Greyhound. If you've never taken Greyhound, it's a real delight. I boarded the bus and it was very crowded and there were only a few seats available, most of them next to some pretty surly looking young men. I approached the first one. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" "Yeah," the guy nodded. "Okay, on to the next." "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" "Yeah," the seconded guy replied as he laughed and looked at his friend sitting in the seat in front of him. "Okay, now I get it. Fair enough." I go to the third guy. "Hey look man, this bus is sold out, so either I'm sitting here or someone else will be, so take your pick." Third guy moves his backpack off the empty seat and I sit down. No sooner do I sit down, but another man boards the bus. He appears homeless, and by that, I mean he appears to have shat himself, and then bathed in motor oil and brushed his teeth with a tin of sardines. He walks right up to the first guy and collapses in the seat next to him. Next up is a rather obese woman. I'm thinking maybe 300 pounds and some change. She's wearing a muumuu, sweating profusely. It's 55 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and is carrying 2 armloads of various cheese and meat snacks for the trip. She squeezes into her seat and plasters the second guy up against the window as he tries in vain to avoid having to touch her. At this point, I stand up to remove my coat and say, "Hey guys, great choices," giving them both the thumbs up. Didn't someone post a story about their grandfather switching places with someone else in a company in World War II, and everyone in the group that he switched from died in battle? My roommate and I were flying to Germany on buddy passes and his priority level was way higher than mine. I was booted off the flight if he went, so he sacrificed himself and got the next flight that was a city over so I could get on this one. So his plane turned out to be an hour late. Then they couldn't take off because they have something wrong with an engine. So they sat on the runway for 4 hours. Then by the time they found a new plane, the pilots had been on the clock for too long. So they had to wait 2 hours for new pilots. Then the next plane had computer problems that took 2 hours to fix. Then he finally landed in Germany, but since it was the next town over he had to take a train to the city we were staying in, Frankfurt, and his train was 2 hours late from electrical issues. You owe him a day of your life, otherwise karma butt fucks you. I was working at a photography studio and traded appointments with another photographer. He ended up with 2 screaming 3 and 4-year-old girls who cried for an hour while their mother and grandmother tried to force them to cooperate. It was 8 AM. Totally, read that, as pornography studio. It freaking ruins the rest of the comment. Off topic, sort of, but my girlfriend is terrified of flying. We were separated on a flight to Mexico, so I offered to give her seat, aisle up front, to the guy in the middle seat next to me. He refused even after explaining to him that she has a real problem flying. Finally, after letting it go for a bit, I woke him up and offered him $100 to switch seats once we land and I could get to an ATM. He finally grumbled and switched with her. I had every intention of paying, and when we landed the guy must have found his moral compass somewhere along the way because he was nowhere to be found. I once sent a pizza delivery to a hotel that was out of our delivery radius, but not by much, but had a reputation for serving clients that generally tipped well. When the woman placed the order, she said, "And hey, send your cutest driver." He and I joked that I would make sure to oblige. One of our drivers, Dan we'll call him, was having a rough night. Deliveries to bad neighborhoods, getting stiffed repeatedly, had some personal problems going on at home. So I figured he could take a long run, enjoy a smoke break, get a fat tip and hopefully meet a cute girl. Anything to help brighten his mood. On his way out the door, I pulled him aside and said, "Hey Dan, Don't worry about how long this one takes, just let him know how it goes. So he disappears into the night and I return to my duties. Then an hour later he is not back. 90 minutes later, and I start to worry. Did I just send a man to his death? Had he been mugged? Why wouldn't he answer his cell phone? Much to my relief, he came striding and less than 15 minutes later, he made a beeline for me, pinned me up against the nearest wall and said with barely contained rage that was a dude. It turns out that the customer was a pre-op transsexual who had a very convincing voice over the phone that had called half a dozen pizza places looking for any way she could to score some action. Turns out that 4 of them showed up within a handful of minutes of each other, were all subject to the same proposition, and then had to go through the uncomfortable business of getting paid for the food. And surprisingly, Dan, who was already having a rough night, did not find this story as hilarious as the rest of our staff did, and thought maybe I'd played an elaborate prank on him just to frick with him. To be clear, I could not have dreamed such a devious, dysfunctional prank in a million billion years. TLDR. Sent a pizza driver to a run I thought was gonna be a fat tip and a cute girl. Turns out it was a transsexual looking to blow an anonymous guy. I thought that was going somewhere altogether different. Oh, a detail I forgot to mention is that one of the children was an infant who cried constantly, and the other was an approximately 3-year-old mentally challenged boy who screamed, squirmed around constantly, and wouldn't stay in his seat when the seatbelt light was on. I noticed the guy I switched with helping the mother out by grabbing the kid when he tried to run off, adding insult to injury I guess. Not only the loudest children but behaviorally extremely difficult as well. That guy is accumulating karma IRL. Me, my husband and a couple friends went to an amusement park a few years back. We were waiting in line for a roller coaster, and there was enough room at the end of one of the rides for my husband and I to get on, but not our friends too. So we let the couple in line behind all of us go ahead, so we could all go together on the next one. We waited a really long time for the next ride. Then the attendant told us there was a problem and the ride would be shut down for a while. We left the line to go elsewhere, and saw our way up at the top of one of the big hills. The coaster was stuck. I felt bad for getting that couple stuck on what should have been our ride, but I was glad it wasn't us. They ended up having to walk down the tracks to get off, and I kind of have this thing about heights. Similar situation. Paid £150 for Olympic opening ceremony tickets. Because these were return tickets, mine was separated from the others in my party, so I was sat by myself. My seat wasn't bad. At one end of the stadium, slightly at an angle. Lady next to me asks if, being by myself, I minded swapping seats with her husband as he was sat in a different location. I thought sure, why not. I went over to him. He looked like he had won the lottery and kept asking if I was sure. I'm not the most observant and his seat looked okay. So yeah, I swapped. It didn't take long for me realize why he was so happy. If you saw the opening ceremony, you may remember a huge tree at one end of the track. It was part of the ceremony. There was a section of seating stupidly placed right behind the tree. It blocked the view quite badly. I kept looking over to them. They seemed so happy together. I didn't want to spoil their evening by swapping back, but I literally could not see crap with this tree in front of me. The people sat around me seemed to be complaining about it as well. Eventually, with about 5 minutes before starting, I asked the guy next to me if he was by himself. He was. I said fine, I'll get you a better seat. I went over to the couple. The stadium is full by now, so it was kind of awkward. I told them that the tree was bugging me and I'd like to swap back, but if they wanted to sit together they now could, as there were now 2 seats available since I got matey to swap as well. They looked so heartbroken but both went trudging off to the seats behind the tree. The wife, herself, thought twice about swapping and both looked back forlornly as they found their positions. Matey and I enjoyed a great opening ceremony. He couldn't believe his luck, but I felt bad for the couple. I was on a Southwest flight to Florida and had booked way ahead of time and also took advantage of their special check-in early thing that allows you to pick your seat and be one of the first people on the flight. Now, I don't know if other airlines have check-in early type deals, but Southwest definitely does. It's like $20 and you get to choose any seat you want. Well, I purposely chose a window seat near the front of the plane. I don't fly that often, so I enjoy the view. As the plane fills up, the seat in between me and the lady on the aisle remains empty. Finally, a flight attendant comes on the loudspeaker, announces that the plane is indeed sold out, but they have 2 unaccompanied minors traveling and would like to seat them together. So what happens? The flight attendant asks the lady in my row on the aisle if she would move, but the lady's kids are right across from her. Then the flight attendant asks me, of course. I'm a bad person. I admit this. So what do? I lie. I tell her that I get motion sickness and I need a window to look out of in order to not get sick. A huge lie, but I don't really care. I was pretty freaking annoyed at this whole situation. I paid extra to make sure I got the seat I wanted, and just because a couple of brats' parents didn't have the foresight to do the same, I have to move? No, I don't think so. Anyway, they got whoever was way in the back to move seats next to me. Some lady who looked pretty mad. I mean, I felt bad for the lady that had to move, but no freaking way was I getting stuck with a middle seat or something when I paid extra to not get stuck with one. TLDR. I'm a bad person. In 9th grade, our teacher handed back our algebra test and I had missed 2 problems on it. I wanted to know what the right answers were, so I asked the girl next to me if she got them right. She looks at her test and sees that she did, so she tells me what she came up with. Our answers were the same, but mine were marked wrong and hers were marked right. We bring our sheets up to the teacher and she re-evaluates our tests. Ends up that we were both wrong, but the teacher just messed up grading the girl's test. She marks them wrong and gives the girl a lower grade. I felt so bad since she was just trying to help me out. Sad part is I had a huge crush on her, so my chances went out the door with this incident. TLDR. I got a girl I liked a lower grade on a test. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.